Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Fake Accents Unite. This wonderfully, quintessentially British evening here for me in the middle of London, and a Britisher from wherever he happens to be coming to us. A bit like the Antiques Roadshow.
Yes, don't give away my location in Afghanistan, will you?
Indeed. I think you were going by some kind of pseudonym. What was it, Lord Miles or something? As you may have
now you're giving much too much away here. What can I say?
I mean, I thought it was very bold of you to do a face reveal in such a dramatic fashion.
Yes, I've kept well for a guy in his 50s, haven't I?
So all that time travel really takes years off the face. Oh, do you please?
It must be that.
Do you please excuse the raging motorcycle outside my window? How have you been this week, mate? You've been doing too much?
Well, I've been annoying lots of people by comments about the Welsh language in Afghanistan, and having fun in the comment section of my YouTube channel and on Twitter. What can I say? I have a mischievous nature. So sometimes, sometimes the angry hornets don't realize that I get quite amused at the hornets being angry after their nest has been kicked.
I see. You're making that you're saying people are using Twitter but are making the mistake of using it as a debate platform as opposed to what it actually is.
Well, it's not so much a debate platform, isn't it? What you get is kind of people sort of in a circle making a statement and then liking each other's statements, and basically telling everybody that they're making arguments when in fact they're not. They're just making statements.
Talking past one another.
Global warming is real. That's not an argument, is it? But you get so much of this, and the bizarre thing is you particularly tend to get it from quite a few people on the reason and logic front. And yes, that's all the more amusing. But what can you say?
I mean, it must be very difficult to have a conversation with you, Britisher, when, of course, you don't recognise. You're kind of like the anti-credentialist anyway.
Yes, I have sort of pretty much turned into the sort of anti-credentialist and the sort of the anti. The one thing I can't stand more than anything else by now are quotations. Placebo said this in the 1930s, and you just go, I don't care. It's, and this, yes, I pretty much have ended up there. I feel you can either make a point by force of argument, or you can't. And I feel we've much too much ended up with, as we say, the equivalent of Borscht and Ben Shapiro angrily flinging their sort of cherry-picked statistics at each other. Either side achieving nothing, but the supporters of both sides then, coming away from the exchange to tell everybody that their man absolutely destroyed the other side. You just look at it and you just go, yeah, I'm sorry, but no.
Well, I find it funny, especially in this particular age, I should say, we're in at the moment. Because if you think back to when, even take when you and I first started interacting, and our kind of little corner of the internet was sort of just getting going, we had the whole issue of, not the whole issue. Well, this was the time when wrecked feminist videos were, the norm and that sort of thing. But of course now we're in this. How would a Guardian reader put it? A post-Brexit COVID times. Okay, nothing is really going on, and people are finding more and more obscura, and they're also retreating back into the kinds of topics where like, I mean, people have made their minds up on most of this stuff already. I mean, take the climate debate, for instance. This is something where, like, you either come down on one side of it or you don't. Like, there's very few people who are waiting to be convinced one way or another, and of course, because of the nature of the world we're living in at the moment, it's not like many people are presenting any new information. It's
also worth pointing out that the people who are in the middle on anything, waiting to make their minds up one way or another, are generally the most popular people out there. I know of what I speak. I think you know what I mean.
Sorry, say again.
The people who, in any debate, on any controversial issue, are the people in the middle who, as you say, haven't yet quite made their mind up. They tend to be the most popular people out there.
Yes, so popular. They
get the pies flung at them from both sides. I think the only way one can put this.
I feel like you're inserting yourself into this particular analogy, Britisher, and deliberately avoiding very, very particular phrasing. Goodness me.
Oh, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. It appears the two of us feel rather silly today. It's the only way I can put it.
Yeah. Do you ever feel serious, Britisher? I think I've known you to be serious perhaps twice in your entire career on this show.
I have occasionally been serious, but how shall we say? I do think that not taking things too seriously, and particularly sort of poking at the flaws in the approaches of either side does make for better living than being one of these people who is kind of grinding his teeth to dust, proclaiming that the world is doomed, and you just look at it and you just go, no, I'm sorry, that's no way to be. I'm sorry. I would sooner be the sort of verbal caricaturist of the world.
Well, I think you probably get off on it, don't you, Britisher? At this point, it's.
I wouldn't go that far. I think you of all people at times, having been cringed audibly on Twitter at my comments regarding the ladies, would know that I don't necessarily look to that as into just being mischievous to get my kicks.
I mean, I don't think we want any more information than that, Britisher.
Yes, yeah. As I say, I tried to keep it as veiled as I possibly could.
So Scowen's chimed in to tell us that we were 84 seconds late. Apparently, this stream. I thought we were bang on time, weren't we?
Are you being dismissive of facts and statistics again?
I'm being dismissive when they come from I'm being dismissive when they come from a spurious source. He says 84 seconds. Any takers on bets for the exact number he's late? An update will come next stream where he will be 71 seconds late.
All I can say is I sense anti-Danish racism here. So just as others have turned on the Welsh, you've turned on the Danes here.
We did get some comments.
You distrust Danish statistics.
I trust a specific Dane's statistics. However, we did get some comments. We got some comments last week, actually, from people who were angry that Fake Accents Unite does what Fake Accents Unite does, which is kind of start from a particular place and then sort of wander off on varying tangents. It being
start 5 minutes late and then get lost.
Well, it's a conversation stream. It is not a. It's not a party political broadcast. It is not an infomercial. It's a...
Yes, this is the kind of conversation you would get if Peter Ustinov and Jacob Bronowski got drunk. Ladies and gentlemen. So please, if need be, Google. You will find those to have been rather impressive gentlemen. But yeah, moving on.
Indeed. To people complaining in the chat, the phone is muted now, don't worry. I can say we've already sparked a controversy with people now arguing climate change in the comments. I just want to make it clear. I really have
yes.
I really have no position on it in
How
this.
many CO2 particles per million? Yes.
I mean, I just like I'm sick to death of talking about it. But I'm not. I don't have a formal position. I just kind of follow the evidence of where it's going at the moment, and that's that. Anyway, I don't want to get into a climate change discussion tonight. What I will say though, you being the anti-credentialist now, will appreciate. I've passed my degree, so I am now quote unquote qualified. I have received a first-class honours in BSc Psychology, the first step on my road to PhD and clinical.
So what you're saying is you're now a Jordan. You're not yet a Peterson, but you're a Jordan.
That's what people call me all the time. Oh, hi Jordan, Geordie, Jojo. No.
Well, yeah, I'm. Why am I not surprised?
So I'm very pleased that that's gone ahead. I'm quite tired tonight.
So you will no doubt be bringing out a book soon saying 12 reasons you're wrong.
12 reasons you're wrong, an antidote to badness. Yes, that's how it goes. But I thought I'd just mention it because I know that there are some people who follow the channel who know that that's been going on in the background for some time now, and it's nice to, I don't put masses of stock in credentials either. However, it is quite nice to get a little bit of validation that I was able to pass it, which is always.
Well, yes,
nice.
You now have your your document framed on the wall. You can sort of fall back on that.
Well, I will when it arrives, but.
Oh yes, you got the email telling you that they'll be sending it you within the next 8 weeks or something, didn't you?
I know, it's usually faster than that, but yeah, 8 weeks. Anyway, enough of this tad. But thanks for all the congratulations in the chat, folks. I really appreciate that. The title of today's stream, I was debating over a little bit. It started off as the event edition because I am giving a talk at the inaugural Sildings Where Do We Go From Here academic conference at the weekend, and I was going to talk about my talk for that, and then I was like, I saw this article by the Telegraph talking about the myth of male fertility, and I thought that was a good jumping off point.
The myth of male fertility.
Yeah, I mean, just going from the very start, has anyone ever tried to claim that men are just eternally fertile and it's always the same level of fertility their entire life?
Well, yeah, I mean, as I say, is that the context of it? That basically there is some sort of myth that men are eternally fertile? Because when you just hear the title itself, you would think that the existence of the human race would kind of prove the myth somewhat true. if it were just a matter of fertility per se.
Well, the myth is about eternal male fertility as opposed to just male fertility as a whole.
Well, I mean, there's always Charlie Chaplin. How old was he when he was still siring offspring?
Well, elderly men, right? Okay, so this is the thing. So the rather clickbaity title says, Eternal Male Fertility? Sorry, chaps, it's a myth. Oh my. Contrary to the popular belief fueled by a string of famous older fathers, research shows that men do have a biological clock after all. Did you know you had a biological clock, Britisher?
I mean, is anybody really surprised that there is a biological clock involved?
Or the idea...
I'm sorry, I find this an odd approach by this article, but Indeed. Then these days when they're that keen to make a point, they'll often take odd approaches. Because I mean, I don't think that it's really that common for 70, 80-year-old men to still be fathering offspring. So
yeah, or at least potentially.
One would assume it's sort of fairly common knowledge. So that I mean, what is it? Sort of peak male fertility is something like 16, isn't it? I mean,
yeah. And like as soon as you turn 20, it starts to degrade, apparently. But but not by much. I mean, if we contextualize this in a particular way, it's very, very rare for a woman to have a successful pregnancy after 40, right? It becomes increasingly difficult and very, very difficult. So it says here, Mick Jagger, Bernie Ecclestone, Rod Stewart, David Jason, Rupert Murdoch, all famous wealthy men that became fathers well past 60, and in doing so perpetuated one of the great myths of male health. I don't think men kind of contextualize their existence and their kind of perception of health by any idea of like eternalism, as it were.
Well, yes, but as I say, I also find the whole thing, it's the great myth. So first you tell us of examples that would in fact be the myth, and then you tell us it's a myth.
Well, it's like there's this, there was a lady who was like the oldest mother in the world, age 72 or something like that. So it's like, exceptions don't prove the rule. You shouldn't necessarily wait that long to try and have kids, right? But I find it ridiculous. I mean, when it comes to male health, the thing that we're concerned about is, one, we're not shooting blanks in the first place, and then two, it's all about like, the physicality. And every man knows that we hit kind of wall at middle age where it becomes more difficult to get in shape. So it's, I mean, how many times have you heard the story? I hit 35 or whatever, and all of a sudden, I started putting on the weight.
Everything starts falling apart. Trust me. I'm talking from a position of my 50s here, and I can assure you that your body just becomes increasingly decrepit.
So they've claimed, they're like, they've set up this premise of the chance of being able to conceive is the same regardless of age, which is a ludicrous statement that nobody has ever made in their entire life.
Yeah.
But it says, a study. I know how much you love studies, Britisher.
Yes, precisely. That's when I just roll my eyes at, a study. Yes, of course.
Nah, wait for it. A study released this week, again, kiboshed that idea, finding that there really is a male biological clock and it starts ticking early. Data from 4,300 couples undergoing fertility treatment found that the probability of live birth drops by a third if the father is over 50. So it's like, so what you're saying is that we don't have the issue that women have, where your chance of giving birth drops by like 90%. What you have is like, you've still got like 2/3 of your swimmers left which are working, and lo and behold, that's better odds than not.
It's just a bizarre. It almost sounds like some study that some sort of embittered feminists would have put up just to sort of say, no, you see, you have a problem too, and you just go, well, yeah, but A, it's not a competition, and B, I'm not really sure you're necessarily proving what you think you're proving.
No. I mean, the person who ran the study was saying, there should be a public health message for men not to delay fatherhood. Now, I'm all in favour of this message, but not because our fertility drops by a whopping third
I shall
after 50.
inform the netball team.
Well, they're all in labour at the moment, so what can I say? But they say, you do produce sperm your entire life as a guy, so in theory you could father a child in your 90s. There you go. That should be the end of that's the end of the article.
Well, yes, I mean, all you need to do in order to achieve that is become a multi-billionaire and find yourself some Playboy model who reckons that she can kill you during your attempt. I mean, what was it? It was Tony Curtis, wasn't it? I saw in an interview once. I don't know if it was Parkinson or whatever. And, he kind of touched on the fact that Tony Curtis, obviously by that time grey-haired, was sitting there, with this sort of Trump tan grey-haired. And, the interviewer kind of said, well, I've heard that your new girlfriend is rather on the young side, and Tony Curtis just, looked at him with that sort of glint in his eyes and went, well, what can I say? Quite a few of my friends have asked that, if you actually consume that side of the relationship, whether it might be dangerous. And my opinion to that has just always simply been, well, if she dies, she dies.
Well,
yeah, I sunk that one, didn't I?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
I'm just thinking, I'm like...
Moving on.
British letting his radical streak out once again. Just wants to murder old women. That's what it is.
No. I think I must have miscommunicated that rather dramatically, or perhaps the chat can tell you what the gag is.
I was distracted, to be fair.
Well, okay.
But I would say it was...
But then, of course, you have never seen Tony Curtis's masterpiece, have you? Some Like It Hot.
No.
No. It's another one of those films that you've more than got on a list somewhere that I've forced upon you, but you've never actually partaken of the film.
No.
It's generally regarded as one of the funniest films ever made.
I know, which is why I think it'll be terrible, and I don't intend to watch it.
Well, some little rumour told me that you didn't think Ben-Hur was too bad.
I mean, are you going senile? I did tell you that to your face last time.
But something tells me you didn't suffer it too much.
No, it was a good film, very much of its time, and I did enjoy it. So, and then at the same time, I'll quite happily, me, I'll quite happily sit down and watch The Island the other day with Ewan McGregor and a young Scarlett Johansson, which no doubt you've not.
My
watched.
interest with young Scarlett Johansson.
Sci-fi.
I'm not familiar with The Island with the young Scarlett Johansson. The closest thing I can remember with a young Scarlett Johansson is The Girl in the Pearl Earring, with Colin Firth playing Vermeer.
Where is it? Is this another rom-com of yours, British?
No, actually, that's not a rom-com. It's difficult to actually explain what that particular film sort of is. It's a sort of drama, and it kind of tells a fictional tale of how the famous painting of the girl with the pearl earring comes about. And it goes without saying that Scarlett Johansson is the serving girl in the house who eventually ends up being painted by Vermeer and becomes the what do they call it? Some people sort of call it the Mona Lisa of the North, don't they? The girl with the pearl earring. So it's one of those sort of staggering pictures that you see and you never forget.
Speaking of Vermeer, have you seen Tim's Vermeer?
Tim's Vermeer? No, that doesn't ring a bell. What?
Tim's Vermeer was a documentary produced by, of all people, Teller of Penn and Teller.
Ah, okay, yes.
And it was...
is he the big one, or he's the small one? Which one is Penn and which one is Teller?
I mean, Penn Jillette is the larger chap with the louder voice, and Teller is the mute, or not really mute, but is mute for the purposes of his act.
I mean, it's a bit like Ant and Dec, isn't it? No one knows which one is Ant and which one is Dec. It's just they come as a double act.
Just... Britisher, you live a very strange life where you just refuse to, if it's a double act, that's enough. They are only what they are. I refuse to learn.
Oh, come off. That's a commonly known trope that Ant and Dec are pretty much, no one knows which one's which.
I mean, I've never come across that.
Back me up here. You know it's true what I'm talking about. There are gags being made about precisely that. That yes, no one knows which is Ant and which is Dec, and I think the same thing is more than likely the case with Penn and Teller. Very few people have any idea which is which.
I think that is
anyway,
that is a nasty lie.
Haired mute one, and he made a program on Vermeer, did he?
He did. Well, he made a documentary called Tim's Vermeer. So he had this friend called Tim Jennison, who basically he's an engineer, he's an art enthusiast, and he became obsessed essentially with I mean, to be polite about it, fascinated is probably a better term, with the paintings from Vermeer. And because they have a kind of almost photographic quality, wouldn't you agree?
Yes, to a certain degree they do, yes.
Sure. So they wanted to try and find a way to emulate his painting technique using light projection. And then they go through this whole process where they discard that and then uses a whole load of different engineering tricks to find a way to mimic the conditions under which the Vermeer could be painted. And then he...
is this the camera obscura, as they call it? That, you know, the sort of pinprick hole, and then you project the light into a sort of dark chamber, and it's reversed.
That's one way, yeah. And they discard that fairly early on, but that's the way. So basically the whole film is not just Tim's journey into trying to paint this painting, but also this kind of idea that potentially Vermeer himself had some kind of mechanical help, and so that they he goes through that and then ends up painting his own painting, basically. And it's just,
and it is in the style of,
and it's quite enjoyable, you know. So it's it's not going to win any great film awards, but I think it's, if you enjoy sort of like artsy, engineering-y kind of documents and are produced well, it's definitely up there.
I wonder whether they mentioned what was he called? Was it Meegeren or Meegeren? I think it's Van Meegeren or whatever, who was the great forger for Vermeer. I think Vermeer was his favourite. He did others.
Yes, to the point where he then became recognised as an artist in his own right, in a sense, and his own paintings gained a semblance of worth.
His forgeries are now worth quite a lot of money. But of course, in his day, he was the foremost art dealer in Holland, who had all these contacts to, you know, impoverished aristocratic families who needed to sell some of the old masters they had in order to still be able to live.
Yeah.
When of course there were no contacts, he was creating the old masters up in his attic. And the reason the whole thing came to light was this absolute hero of a man, to whom they should be a Hollywood film. I insist they must be one made. This absolute hero of a man, once Holland was occupied, he sold fakes to Hitler and Goering and Goebbels. Basically, this guy started selling self-made hokum to the Nazis, because the Nazis, of course, famously were, you know, they were looting all across Europe. They were trying to get their hands on any piece of art they could, and Van Meegeren was a helpful art dealer who provided them with an eye on bottomless pit of masters, if you know what I mean.
Amazing.
So, this is how the whole thing. This is the only reason we know it happened, because of course, once the war ended, the Dutch wanted this guy's head, because he was a collaborator, a man who had helped the Nazis scour all the art treasures of out of Holland, and this disgraceful man. We want revenge, and of course, in the dock, then realizing that he was in serious trouble, he basically said, "You do realize they were fakes."
Yes. Yeah,
I've never sold an original in my entire life.
You just siphoned the money out of the Nazi machine, and lo and behold, he was suddenly a more respectable.
He was a national hero. He left the courtroom as a national hero. So he went into the courtroom, the collaborator, the hated villain. He came out of the courtroom the absolute hero of Holland, because here was a guy who had literally, sort of taken the Nazis by the ear, and the guts of the man was incredible, if you know what I mean. But yes, the only reason we know he was a forger is because he admitted to it. Had he not admitted to it, he would have gone to his grave without anybody ever realizing that these paintings were fake. So, the greatest forgers, the greatest con men are in a way those who have to give themselves away, or else the world would never know. And it kind of makes you wonder how many sort of Van Meegeren types or whatever are there in all sorts of walks of life who manage to pull off the perfect crime. But because it's perfect, it remains completely invisible.
Well, I mean, it doesn't even necessarily have to be perfect. We know that the effectiveness, shall we say, of our law enforcement is actually remarkably low. I think, if you've ever had anything stolen from you, I don't know if you've ever had it returned. And I mean, I had a considerable sum of money stolen from me at one point, and the fact that it was in another country meant just you never get anything back. Like they don't even respond to your emails after a bit.
There's a famous novel by a novelist called Dürrenmatt, who I believe had the unfortunate honour of being the man most nominated for a literary Nobel Prize and never to get one.
Right.
But he basically, in one of his novels, it is this sort of tale of two men who have basically been after each other for their entire life. One is a crook and the other one is the kind of the law enforcement officer,
Yeah.
And at the beginning, the villain, it almost as if to sort of dare him, throws a completely random person. He's with the other guy, and he throws a completely random person off the bridge that crosses the Bosporus. And so it's just a pedestrian, someone else who's coming in the other direction, and throws him off.
Right.
And looks at him and goes, "There is absolutely nothing you can do, is there?"
Ooh.
It's basically your word against mine.
Yeah.
And it's sort of it's startling as to just how cold-blooded the thing is. But he just basically says, "Look, what are you going to do about it?" And it kind of is part of this sort of endless tale. In the end of the story, they're really two old men, and they're still hating each other's guts. But worse, of course, the villain is still living in luxury, and the policeman is kind of heading towards a policeman's pension, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But well, it's a sort of fascinating tale.
Well,
yes.
If you think about it, we have these kind of grand stories, some of which have been adapted into films. I mean, and all the mob films, both fictional and sort of based on reality and that sort of thing. But they tend to, these are people who they had to get into the position that they were in somehow, right? They didn't get caught on the first crime. And it's only kind of when either they become incredibly unstable or things get too much, they've got too many hands and too many pockets, or there's a very successful sting operation because they're now a notable figure who they want to take down. But most street crime goes,
untreated. There's no chance of you ever, gaining restitution there. Yes, there is also a famous moral dilemma, isn't there? Which I think quite a few sort of, police films and crime dramas have gone into over time. That basically, if you actually know someone is guilty, if you are the police officer and you know someone is guilty, and they're being investigated now for something else, which is in doubt, or they might not have done, but you see an opportunity to get them for it nonetheless. Are you a moral person for getting them for it, knowing full well that they are guilty of sin, but more than likely of other crimes?
I mean, this is why, you get people who confess to things in prison, right? They don't know how many victims a murderer has had. and they just need to get him on one, and then he was bragging to his cellmate about this, that, and the other, and that linked him to this other one.
Well, I mean, that's what famously happened in the Colin Stagg case, wasn't it? That this was this guy who got done for a he got charged with a murder with which he clearly never had anything to do, and the police then kept insisting that it was him, so that they kept feeding the press with sort of snippets that he had got away. And the press once in a while would print stories as in, the one that got away. And of course, this guy remained completely unemployable. He lived in some tower block in London with getting bricks through his windows once in a while. Until a serial killer in prison actually admitted to having killed the person.
Oh, good grief!
For whom about whom the police have been leaking stuff to the press for 15 years about Colin Stagg.
Yeah.
Yes, it really is an absolute horror story.
I think there was a similar one about this guy who was I think he was mildly disabled as well, and the police just kept trying to pin the murder of a dog walker on him. And of course, it turned out years and years and years later that he'd had nothing to do with it at all. He'd been in the park that day, but he was completely innocent.
The terrifying thing, as you get older, you will no doubt experience a similar phenomenon that I have over the decades. That you will come across, reports on the news in which you sit there and you just go, "Nah, I don't think so." And then 20 years later, the people get let out, and you're sitting there going, how did I know this? I mean, there was the famous one with Farouk Bulsara. Basically, that's the name, the real life name of Freddie Mercury. So there was a guy who was completely adoring of Freddie Mercury, so much so he changed his name to Farouk Bulsara.
Okay.
And then Jill Dando, who was a sort of BBC presenter, but particularly of that sort of, crime program where they kind of showed cold cases and try to get any witnesses to come forward and try to solve cases that way. So she had a connection whereby one thought that possibly someone might have, organised a revenge killing.
Right.
But because this woman, this BBC presenter, just got shot dead outside her front door one day. And, no one had a clue. There was no witnesses, there was no weapon, there was nothing. And then suddenly the police arrested Farouk Bulsara, whose flat was a shrine to Freddie Mercury, who lived in the area. And I sat in front of the television and said, I'm sorry, but they've just arrested the local weirdo. That's all they've done.
Yeah.
They've got nothing to point this man towards the crime. And of course, they then concocted a case and they put him up. And lo and behold, he was found guilty because there was traces of gunpowder in his pocket, which clearly showed that he must have been the one who had the weapon. And he had no explanation. So even though they didn't have a weapon, they clearly could therefore connect him with having had a weapon, and Jill Dando is dead. And you just go, yeah, you still haven't explained why he would want to kill Jill. What's his motive? What is anything here? And of course, on appeal, it then turned out that they brought in some expert who said, oh yes, the microscopic traces in his jacket pocket could indeed be from gun residue. They said, well, is there anything else that could be from? And he said, yes, paint thinner.
Ooh, little bit of a difference there.
Yeah, and the whole thing just collapsed right there and then. But here's the onion for the whole thing. I remember distinctly Jack Straw. I don't think it was Parliament, but telling either an interviewer or gathered press or whatever that no, he wasn't entitled to compensation for having been in prison for several years because he hadn't been proved innocent.
What?
Yes, he's simply been proved not guilty, because he
Yeah.
still could be the one who killed her. And you just go, yeah, I mean,
That's on you.
him and everyone else in the country.
Yeah, him and everyone else. That's ridiculous. I do remember.
But that's the sort of ultimate crowning glory to the injustice, that they lock him up for years. Eventually, the whole thing collapses and they let him out of prison. But then the Home Secretary says, "Yeah, but we don't owe him anything because he's not innocent." As far as the law is concerned, he's merely not guilty.
His entire life has been destroyed. You know. Good grief.
Yeah, it's quite terrifying when you see those things. But what is particularly sort of worrisome is that, as you know, I am the anti-credentialist and whatever, but you know, and I don't in any way hold myself to be some great genius.
It's okay.
This is
We
what
don't.
I mean.
We don't
I am
hold you
sitting
either.
here. I can imagine you concur. But I'm sitting here in front of the television going, no, it's the wrong guy. And you just go, how can I have this insight, but the people involved haven't?
See, I can respect that, Britisher, but I struggle when you have the same conclusion about, say, Prince Andrew.
Well, to Prince Andrew, my view is simply that that's more a matter of the standard of proof. I mean, right now he is being sued, but then that is, of course, a much lower standard of proof on something for which I believe there will not be a what do they call it, statute of limitations. So they could actually prosecute him, but they're not prosecuting him, they're suing him. And you just wonder, well, why is that then? Because you would never win a prosecution. You would never be able to fulfill the standard of proof of beyond a reasonable doubt.
Isn't that just potentially, as you say, just a matter of records, though, as opposed to anything else?
Well, it's also a matter of the fact that I think the state of New York has got some kind of court judgment out that says that Epstein's estate, which of course is significant, will be legally liable towards any victims. So if you manage to get some kind of legal judgment that states that you are one of the victims, you're in for a massive payday.
There you go.
Call me cynical, but yeah.
Nobody's ever called you cynical before, Britisher. Don't be silly. On the kind of true crime aspect, I do remember there was one case in America where there was a young man, who had been convinced by his stepfather or a friend of the family, that he was part of some kind of international alliance of hitmen, essentially. And he said, "Oh, do you want to join us?" And of course, being a young man, and it's kind of scary, but also kind of thrilling at the same time. He would go over to his uncle's place, or whatever he was. I keep changing the relationship between these two people, but I can't remember. I just know that he was connected to the family in some way, and they would practice, and he had all these firearms that he would file the.
He would be learning how to be a super killer.
Yeah, essentially. But according to, they took videos of them doing it and stuff like that, and it was terrible. It was the most unprofessional thing you could possibly imagine. If you could, it's just a sort of like a bit of an American redneck with an Uzi in his back garden, shooting it rather poorly, and then he said, we're going to go, we've got a target, and he was convinced he was getting messages from this radical in India, I think it was, who was running this international cabal, and he could completely convince this guy, and he went over to this, obviously a woman's house, and then the chap who said he was the head hitman or whatever, basically wussed out. And he said, let's get out of here. And they ran off without firing a shot. So you can imagine, like, they're running open carry down the road, thinking, pretending to be all cool and that, and then he just, wusses out and leaves. But of course, he said to the guy, the head of the organisation is very angry with me for bringing you on board without his express permission. So you've got to prove it now. You've got to kill this woman. And so the chap did murder her, and of course, but then had a massive breakdown because he was terrified that this organisation was going to come after him because he'd done such a messy job of it. And he went and he turned himself into the police, and of course starts spewing all this stuff about an international league of assassins. And of course it was all fabricated by this guy with an obsession with this particular activist who wanted to be a hitman but wasn't. It's just crazy. It's like,
well, there's nothing quite as weird as reality. I mean, when you were talking of them sort of there being video of them trying to be tough as nails and no doubt crawling around the brushwork, that there was similar stuff here in Britain, of course. This goes back a long way, so forgive me if, again, just as with you, my details are somewhat hazy. But I'm sure there was some, Muslim terror group that did some, military training in the countryside. And again, it was caught on video, and it was just woeful. It was, it's sort of patently ridiculous.
It's actually more difficult than you might think to train someone to use firearms and to use them well.
Yeah, I mean, of course, if you don't actually have any arms, but you're just basically carrying a stick or something like that, and you're sort of diving behind bushes and trying to look cool, that's the sort of thing you have to imagine. But all wearing camouflage and shouting Allahu Akbar once in a while, that kind of thing. And yes, I think they all got done for obviously, it was fairly obvious what they were trying to do. But at the same time, yes, it was one of those cases where you just feel, they're not the brightest sparks.
No.
I mean, I remember doing a video years ago, I think it's still up on my channel, called sort of the Terrorism Olympics or something like that.
Okay.
In which you just basically have one daft case after another of, wannabe superhero terrorists that just turn out to be absolute cookie cutters.
The modern equivalent of the Four Lions, is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, as I say, that reality always beats fiction in that regard. I mean, was it in Plymouth? I'm not sure. There was a guy, he was a convert, but he wanted to prove his mettle and show that he was ready to die for Allah. So he went to some cafe somewhere, Plymouth, Southampton, something like that. I forget which city it was. And wanted to, blow himself up at the cafe. And you just go, oh, well, yeah, I mean, it's a really strategic place. Some cafe on the south coast no one's ever heard of, So already there you can sense here is a real genius at work. But he goes into the toilets in order to prime his bomb. And the thing goes off partially.
Oh, no.
So you have to imagine that you're sitting in a cafe somewhere on the south coast, and suddenly you just hear a very, very loud bang. That's all. It isn't as if the whole place falls apart. No, it's just a very, very loud bang.
Yes.
And when it's investigated, they find a guy who is sitting on the toilet, like in a comedy film.
Yeah.
Soot in the face, smouldering, who then needs to be rescued by the fire brigade.
Looks like something out of, the Pink Panther or something. It's
and
ridiculous.
Yes, it's precisely, it's the Pink Panther. It's absolutely ludicrous. And yes, the amount of times, I mean, do you remember the shoe bomber? You must have heard that, at least the term, you must have heard the term, the shoe bomber.
Yes.
So this was a guy who had explosives in his shoes. And when the fuse didn't work, he tried to set his shoes on fire while sitting in the cabin. So again, imagine you are there in the plane, and then next to you, the rather nervous-looking Asian fellow who started sweating about 20 minutes ago suddenly takes his shoes off and tries to set them on fire with a firelighter. Oh, well, that's not going to attract any attention at all, is it?
No.
And if over time there has been case after case after case of abject stupidity. And what you have to understand with these guys is they want to be Batman. But, yeah, they're not, are they?
Not really, no. Unfortunately, I think it's quite sad, actually, when you've got people who are kind of reduced to such a state that, they're willing to try anything. And I in some ways, I'm kind of grateful for the lack of competence. I'd rather we were talking about a man who was so ridiculous he tried to set his shoes on fire on a plane, rather than about the guy who successfully detonated a shoe bomb on one. But
this is one of the things that I've always held. I've said this for years. When it comes to these terrorists, we should do everything we can to ridicule them, because the one thing that they crave is to be Batman. So if every single terrorist, whether successful or not, his face is always shown on television as his face photoshopped onto some, fat guy in a pink tutu, that's the way to deal with these people. Abjectly humiliate them and ridicule them. Because, for all the talk of Allah, 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 they want to be Macho Man. They want to be Batman. And the trick is that society should not give them that at all.
I disagree. I think you're kind of conflating the murderer who, wants to be recognised by his peers, like if he kind of Zodiac killer or something. Someone who taunted people, who wanted people to know what he was doing. I think we're with a lot of these people, we're dealing with a lot of. You've got the radicals, who are, they believe this so fervently that, they're going to be rewarded in heaven. And then you've got the other side of it, which is people who are, they want to believe and they want to do something that matters. And of course, they see everything in the West as decadence and away from tradition, and there's nothing that they can do. And they're actually really depressed about that. And so this is their only way out. It's the only honourable thing left to do for them. And I think that...
Well, yes, but that's just it. Honourable. They're very much concerned about honour, the view that one has of them.
The trouble is,
if we would unanimously just simply decide to basically, ridicule the living daylight out of all of them on every time we report about them, no matter how successful they may have been.
Well, there's the.
I think we would make a serious dent into their efforts.
I would say that if you, the trouble is, it can come off as the mockery kind of backfires and that sort of thing. Because what happens is the next convert comes along, and they say, look, they mock us with every turn. They slap in the face of Allah. All we're trying to do is enact God's will. And it's sick. It's really sick. But that then radicalizes that young person. I think it's very reasonable, for instance, to do what we do, which is, you don't show the pictures of the terrorists. You show the pictures of the victims. You don't give them the spotlight when it comes to these things. But then you also need to have a process for de-radicalization. That and to my mind, the strongest deterrent is to find the people who are too radical and just get rid of them, because they're beyond reason. But it's those young people. You don't want to give them ammunition. You don't want to give the radicalizer ammunition to create the next attempt, as it were.
Well, we will have to disagree on this one.
Fair enough. That's fine. It's my...
No, I really think that I really think that basically portraying them all in the public eye as non-binary otherkins might make a serious dent.
You're saying dress them all up in pink, put clown makeup on them and red rosy cheeks, and then make them, stand and get their mugshot then.
The one thing that they want, the sort of macho man image, the heroic martyr kind of thing. Make that all look absolutely hollow and ridiculous.
Well, there's our position. You'll have to make your own decisions, folks. Do you come down on the side of the British, or do you come down on the side of reason and honesty? No, I'm joking. Of course,
oh, so well put.
You come down on the side of the British or on my side. So that's the question. I've just got some breaking news. Of course, Stephen Fry has been noisy today. He's been on Talk Radio.
What has Stephen Fry been doing?
Stephen Fry on Talk Radio is talking about Extinction Rebellion because they're having a massive protest, or a mass protest, I should say, in Trafalgar Square. So is
Stephen Fry for or against?
Of course he's in favour, okay? Right, so Extinction Rebellion has kicked off a mass protest in Trafalgar Square and demanded the government stop investing in fossil fuels, okay? One of those horrifically vague demands which is in no way feasible at the current time. Stephen Fry, they're loud, disruptive, they throw paint and block traffic, but what else is going to make politics face the horrors of climate change? David Attenborough gets international, worldwide coverage of his documentary Life on Planet Earth. You have Greta Thunberg a couple of years ago, who was literally meeting with world leaders about the whole climate change issue. He himself, an outspoken man on such things, is on national radio talking openly about it in a supporting position, and nobody is disagreeing with him. And I just beggars belief to me. You're not a radical if you are. If you're pushing on an open door, it's like politics.
What you said there, what you said there about it, of course he's for. I don't think it's necessarily of course he's for with Stephen Fry, because Stephen Fry has been quite outspoken against the woke, for example.
Yes, he doesn't like
he
people.
He is a left winger, but he it's not. He doesn't seem to be of the type who is basically just a left winger, and therefore he adopts every single position that they happen to have. If you know what I mean.
Well, no, he doesn't. He adopts almost every position. He's just pro free speech. That's the difference.
But when it comes to this whole thing, I really think that if you sort of go back to Victorian days or something like that, if you wanted to be a do-gooder, you would more than likely you'd have to go and help serve soup at the soup kitchen or something like that. So there wasn't a convenient way of being, the upper middle class or rich person who could just basically do something that would in no way inconvenience them, and then just get on with their lives.
Yeah.
You would have to go and meet the wretched, if you know what I mean. There would be an effort involved with trying to be a do-gooder.
I mean,
what seems to have been the case is that we seem to have kind of almost turned that into a sort of consumer item.
I mean,
whereby the celebrities of this world can sort of plug into a particular subject, give their 30-second soundbite on the media, and then they've done good, and then they can disappear again.
Well, celebrities, what they would do, I mean, they've always done this, but it's just a different way of kind of the flatterers getting to the celebrities, whereas everyone's kind of open to everyone now. And it's not something I really regard as a positive. It's really interesting that you mentioned the lack of work. It feels like a lot of these social issues, instead of actually putting in the work and getting people mobilised and doing things in the streets, taking it to the streets, as it were, what you end up with is, attempts from people to get trending on Twitter. This also makes it incredibly easy, again, for people to ignore things. It's much less easy I should say, to ignore a group of people at your door than it is to, ignore the mob on Twitter, even though the mob on Twitter is likely many, many times larger than the group who's lobbying you outside your house. So I don't like that, from a kind of one of the interesting stories from the Bible. I'm not trying to convert anyone here or anything like that, but we know of things like there's the parable where they see the old lady, or the little old lady who goes to give her tithe to the temple, and the great rich people come in and deposit their enormous sacks of gold, and then she goes and she lays a single low value piece, and he says, she's more deserving of her place in heaven than those rich people because of the she gave more. But it's also the kind of reinforcing an earlier sort of proverb, which is like, don't pray loudly in the streets. It's kind of like anti-virtue signaling and built into the Christian faith in many ways. You don't walk around lamenting, cover yourself in sackcloth, cover your face in ashes, ringing a bell, talking about how sorry you are or whatever, or that you repent.
The hair shirt is to be worn under the clothes.
Essentially,
it's, strictly speaking, supposed to be invisible.
You're supposed to be, if you really care about these issues or any issue and that sort of thing, you shouldn't be seeking the public kind of gratification, the virtue seeking. And it comes for two reasons. One of the reasons is, of course, that the human being is something which thrives off the gamification, right? So it's like, to take it more secular route, it's like the boy who cried wolf, and he gets he cries wolf, he thinks it's funny, but he also gets sort of raised up as a hero. You called out the wolf, we were all safe, and then of course nobody believes him later on because he keeps doing it, and the reason he keeps doing it is because, of course, is not just because it's funny, but he gets a validation for it, and our entire lives at the moment are run in a gamified state by social media in many, many cases. So,
well, I'm not sure. I think there is some sort of conflict in the whole thing. I don't think it's just entirely clear cut, as in, don't pray too loudly in the street. I think there is an element of, there is something there. So there is a value of setting an example, and there is, to a certain extent, whether in a negative way or in a positive way, such a thing as propaganda. As in, people don't know of it until it's basically thrust in their face.
Your example should stand by itself without kind of, relentless self-promotion, as it were. There's one thing to...
Yes, I say, the relentless self-promotion, that's when you're gaining a benefit from it. But if it's just because this is how they will rationalize it. To themselves, they rationalize it as in someone needs to set an example. We are the people who have some limited influence, and therefore it is beholden on us to basically inform and guide, do what little we can to guide the populace in the right direction. That's how they will rationalize it to themselves.
Yeah, of course they do.
But of course, to a lot, it just basically looks like another way of promoting clearly promoting yourself, but also a way of getting both the accolades, but also the sort of self-satisfaction of being the person who does good without you really needing to do anything.
Well, I find it, yeah, exactly, but I also find it interesting in the same way. Like, a celebrity would be invited, let's say, onto a television program back in the day, and they might espouse what they're doing. They're getting talked to. They're getting a bit of attention. They bring up the social issue that they want to they're promoting their book or whatever, and it's on X, Y, and Z, and they're also promoting this issue. And people will try and get them to wear a pin which represents X, Y, and Z. And now, and the reason celebrities were the prime focus for getting that kind of messaging is because it's difficult to actually get a message out there, especially if you're a corporation. I find the interesting split now where we have the corporate Twitter account, which has kind of superseded the celebrity in many ways, because they're services which everybody uses, or a lot of people use. And whereas before you might have to design an entire advertising campaign, buy billboard space, like nobody's going to have the CEO of Asda come onto their talk show to talk to the regular people. Like, no one's going to identify with that. It's not the same as a movie star. However, now you've got a Twitter account from Asda, shouting Black Lives Matter to the rafters, because it costs them nothing.
Well, there is you've just piqued something there that is a sort of a low-level irritant to me, and has been for some considerable time, and that is, you will have come across this, great clips from Parkinson or Frost interviews from the 1970s or early 80s.
Okay.
With really fascinating celebrities from way back when who came on, had a great conversation or whatever. Here's the onion.
Mm-hmm.
These people didn't come on to promote a book. Those were the days where people did talk shows because, well, they were interesting. Someone invited them because, this is an interesting guy. Like this Billy Connolly guy, bring him on. But it wasn't that, I've got a book to publish. I've got, a book to
promote,
to shill. No, it was you invited some folks on. If they, if Muhammad Ali was in the country, let's see if we can get him on. He's not necessarily here to promote something, but if we get a chance, let's see whether we can get him on. And I think the proof is in the pudding. That the actual end result, given the fact that a lot of those interviews still today are seen as sort of golden oldies, whereas what interviews have been done on television for the last 6 months, and who's taken any notice of anything?
The only, do you know what? The only thing I can think of in recent memory, possibly the 2012 Olympics, which was kind of before sport beyond football really had been kind of infected by this idea that we can actually can get away with virtue signaling in these particular areas and become about this sort of thing. So I remember that a lot of British Olympians became stars overnight because the whole country was enraptured with them, and it was all on home turf, and so everyone loved that, especially in the kind of I think a load of them ended up on panel shows, alongside comedians and that sort of thing. So, and they would just be genuine, regular, normal people, and that was part of their appeal in a lot of ways. They are these athletes, but that's because that is their entire focus. They're not involved in anything else really. And then of course they were got, and then of course the last 10 years has happened. And now we have us kneeling at the World Cup or whatever. It's not.
Well, I think it's also sort of the lack of the personalities that personalities are now just basically, I do good, I say virtuous things. Whereas
you're also always terrified of being replaced by the next quote unquote influencer. Any random person could somehow ascend. I mean, take take Femi, for instance, who has no noticeable skills, who has not proven himself in any arena, and yet
I mean, he's no noticeable skills. He's brilliant. He was for us staying in the EU, so he must be a genius.
No, but he's an influencer in his own right. You know, he's the Paris. Yes. He's a Paris Hilton in many ways, but without the money.
Well, he says the right thing.
Yes,
to the right crowd,
and so he's been featured. You know, he's talked to journalists and that sort of thing. Like, who is this guy? Who cares what he has to say anyway? Like, he's not an expert. He's not a celebrity with a certain thing, but he has gained a following like a celebrity, and therefore, he becomes eminently replaceable. And I'm not saying that celebrities are ever kind of worth their salt in the first place, but you can see where the danger comes in, where now instead of this kind of group of quote-unquote proven celebrities, anyone is now a potential celebrity, and you are always replaceable. If there is nothing
behind it whatsoever, if you can simply make anyone into a celebrity, then any celebrity is immediately expendable, because you can just make another.
And so people play to the rules of the game which they are playing. And that's...
I mean, to give you an idea of what I would call a real celebrity in sport... Daley Thompson. He was the decathlon athlete of his era, and at the was it in LA? I think it was in LA, the Olympics. He walked in. You know when they've got sort of the march in of the athletes in the opening ceremony.
Yeah.
As though somebody carries the Union Jack. I mean, this time round, cringingly, it had to be a man and a woman. And in every single case, it looked as if the man was carrying it and the woman was hanging onto the bottom bit somehow, which was just utterly ridiculous. But Daley Thompson, he wasn't the flag bearer, but he walks in, bold as brass, with a T-shirt that he'd obviously just had made for this particular occasion, with a cheesy grin on his face, like you cannot imagine, on which the T-shirt reads... The second best decathlon athlete in the world is gay. Now, instant reaction. The German Olympic team complained. So there was a press conference the next day. There was all sorts of kerfuffle. And he just went, well, I believe we're here to find out who the second best decathlon athlete of the world is. I don't know why the Germans are complaining. We still have to find out who's going to win. And what was so funny was that he was a truly great athlete. Daley Thompson was fantastic. But there was another guy, a German, Jürgen Hinksen, who was also absolutely top of the world. So there was really Daley Thompson, Jürgen Hinksen, then there was a big gap, and then there was the rest of the decathlon field, if you know what I mean. So it was obvious that this was a sort of barb at the German, but he had never said a word. And in the press conference, he even said, "Well, it might just be a misunderstanding, you see, because in Britain, where I come from, gay just means happy." They just didn't know how to deal with this guy, and he was just taking the mickey out of everybody. And then came the contest, and it was one of the greatest contests of all times. I mean, at this particular Olympics, the 400-meter hurdles was absolutely sensational, with both the athletes finishing way above the world, beyond the world record.
Amazing.
At that particular Olympics, the same happened. Jürgen Hinksen and Daley Thompson both smashed the world record in decathlon to pieces. But Daley Thompson smashed it to pieces just that little bit more.
How gutting is
it?
The
silver medalist, and second best decathlon athlete of the world happened to be the German. And he was so cocky. It was unbelievable. But as I say, he was cocky and he knew full well what the risks were, because if he had come second in that, he would have looked a right biscuit.
That's a very good choice of words.
But he really pulled it off. And, it really was one of those where you just felt only the British. Only the British. But yes, as far as I'm concerned, that's a sort of sports celebrity who is more than just someone who wins a medal. Because there is actually wit, there is personality behind it. There is more than just, I'm just particularly good at this discipline. And therefore someone like that is much more interesting a guest if you have someone like that on. I mean, just like with Muhammad Ali, how many boxers would really give a good interview? And then you have Muhammad Ali on and just, all hell breaks loose.
I do find it interesting because I'm thinking back to kind of memorable interviews now. Things which have stood out. It could be anything. It might, question time, audience members and so on as well. And I remember watching Sargon on the BBC. That was interesting because you didn't really know what was going to happen. He didn't necessarily present himself the best, but it was at one of those surreal moments where you're kind of like, well, first off, I know the guy. But secondly, it's also like, this is one of us. This doesn't happen. We don't get given that kind of attention. It's also this kind of weird position of like they're trying to sabotage us with dishonest cutting. So it's like that was a weird one. The Jordan Peterson Kathy Newman interview was very notable, where you had an actual intellectual suddenly there. But certainly in my lifetime, a couple of times where, weirdly enough, I find him to be somewhat inconsistent, obviously. But Peter Hitchens and several of his interviews, notable interviews, usually his older material, I must say, compared to now, because he's character assassinated a lot more on in his more recent stuff, and in his old stuff, when he was a correspondent, rather than just a columnist. He had some interesting things to say and was paired up with more interesting people, but that's not really recent in that sense. I'm watching stuff from the 90s, the 80s, so it's really hard to pick out those kind of really strong. I don't feel like there was a kind of era-defining interview that I could pick out really from the past.
Well, as I say, I think what it was is not only that you had celebrities, and that those celebrities were not necessarily just always coming on if they had a product to push, but at the same time you also had a different generation of interviewer.
Yeah.
Who, much more relaxed, not hectoring, not trying to get something out of, but if you have someone like Frost or Parkinson, it's very much they're sitting there in an armchair going, well, and they've got a few questions prepared, and they know how to sort of tickle the person into conversation. And often in these programs, you would then not only get that guest talking to the interviewer, but then if they had another guest on, the two guests would then start talking to each other. And at times, this could bring out the most sort of remarkable. I mean, surely you must be aware, because he died not all too long ago, and the clip was going all around social media, when Freddie Starr came on, and I think it was Parkinson, and Muhammad Ali was the other guest. And Freddie Starr and Muhammad Ali just started talking to each other as if Parky wasn't even there.
Huh.
And at some point, Freddie Starr then starts drawing Ali in and telling him this terribly, terribly interesting story, and he's getting quieter and quieter and quieter. And then just at the right moment, he's sort of leaning into Ali, whispering into his ear about this tale, and the microphone could just about pick it up, and then he suddenly goes, "Boo!" and Muhammad Ali, this huge hulk of a man, heavyweight world champion of the world, just basically, jumps and shrieks like a girl, but it's fantastic. But yes, where do you see that today? The spontaneity has gone out of those things. It's now everything has become much more corporate.
Remember that this is, again, specifically in the corporate atmosphere, we have seen the massive rise of the podcast format. I mean, I appreciate we don't have a guest on today, but we've had various guests on over the years who've been interesting people, people making waves in different environments, but obviously no really big celebrities or anything like that. But Joe Rogan exists, right? Doing his particular style of interview. I'm aware there's someone called H3, even though I have never really got on with that side of things. But I've never.
H3, of course, famously made a name for himself by fighting a court case.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know anything about it.
He was being done. Yes, he was being done for copyright breach or whatever, for video in which he was criticizing what some other YouTuber had put out.
Okay.
So
sounds familiar.
It was criticism of content, and it would have been much easier just to fold, and there was significant money at risk.
Yeah.
And H3 just stuck to his guns and went, no, I'm perfectly entitled to comment on what this person, does in their videos.
Fair use.
And if I am then showing snippets of those videos in order to illustrate what I'm actually talking about, then that is entirely fair use, and I'm not going to be bullied out of this. And yes, at the, this is just it. This is swings and roundabouts on the internet, isn't it? Now H3 is suddenly being, because he's rather left-leaning and whatever, I think, in politics, he's now suddenly seen as, he is the bad guy, he doesn't know what he's talking about. But back then, he was quite the hero for a substantial part of sort of our corner of the internet, of YouTube and of social media in general, because yes, he had defended the actual right and had basically stood up and said, well, no, we have to be able to do commentary, or else everything immediately gets censored.
Indeed. So
H3 has, there's a reason why the guy is known. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I have no doubt. I mean, I've never watched his content and enjoyed it. That's all I'm saying. But my general point, of course, is being that there are these enormous podcasts. Now, some would say that they've been attempted to be acquired by corporations. I mean, there was the whole Joe Rogan moving to Spotify thing.
Yes.
Which, as far as I can tell, has largely backfired.
Well, the staff don't like him, if I recall.
The staff don't like him. They refuse to upload certain portions and interviews. But also, I just don't think Spotify is like a growing platform in the same sense, right? So he brought a good portion of his audience over, but I don't know whether or not he might still be the most popular podcast in the world, but I don't know if he's necessarily getting new people on board, and whether or not he'll retain that title, for very long, essentially. If other people will come up in his wake and occupy the space he was previously doing. Although I will say that YouTube is kind of in a bit of a dearth at the moment of that sort of thing. We have a distinct lack of, I guess, like big kind of long form successful podcasting with interesting people. I don't really see that.
Well,
at the moment.
I think YouTube have pretty much gone out of their way almost to kill it off.
Yeah. Nobody wants to be.
You cannot keep suppressing stuff like that and then expect that it will just still grow and prosper.
Nobody wants to be dependent on them anymore. That's the trouble. If it could be ripped away in a second, if they're not on the creator side, which they have not been for many years, as we know, then what do they expect? But of course, everything is also moving towards shorter content. I mean, we saw it with the rise initially of Snapchat, then Instagram, now TikTok. Everything's going down into, as attention spans decrease and diminish as well, we're seeing that our space for that sort of thing is decreased. Like you would have shorter content on YouTube before, with the option of doing long content, and so an audience for long content was kind of maintained and created. But now all of the new people are going onto these other platforms, and they don't get, there's not even the option to create something above 2 minutes or whatever. So and that's where the money is. So YouTube becomes less profitable, and we'll see where things go.
It's also that sort of audiences over time have almost been trained to accept shorter and shorter stuff.
It's the Twitter effect as well. Like we get a dopamine kick, and obviously sites like any social media site wants to bombard you with content, because for every new piece of content there's a new potential ad, which just massively
and given
increases.
that there are only 24 hours in the day, the shorter the clips are, the more of them they can bombard you with.
Indeed. And also the more different ways that they can capture your attention, so you'll spend longer on it. I mean, someone sitting in an office somewhere would be very happy if you spent 24 hours of your time online consuming content. Going to consume.
Just basically sitting there like Clockwork Orange with those sort of braces holding your eyes open.
Yeah, multiple screens, multiple ads, that sort of thing. It's kind of strange. Anyway, do I know what we're going to do about it? I don't know. I mean, there's the option of going independent, as Lotus Eaters have, for instance, but I don't think. As you say, as chat is mentioning here, Richard Crook, YouTube is the recruitment ground once they leave its all legacy audience. I don't think, it's actually remarkably difficult to promote yourself without these things, which is why they still promote, they put their podcast clips on YouTube and they advertise across, all of the social media that they can, and they do multi-streaming to all sorts of platforms. And that's because website traffic is actually remarkably low. People won't actually go there. Which is not to say that some, the committed don't, and the committed obviously pay subscriptions and keep them going, etc. But it's not quite the same. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's this kind of strange value proposition in the YouTube space.
I think it's similar. I think the thing to compare it with here is banks and bank accounts. There have been all sorts of attempts, even with government involved, of trying to lure people away from their bank accounts, because the sort of established banks here in Britain. It's pretty much a rip-off, compared to what some other banks offer. But, bank loyalty is remarkable. People don't want to, leave them. It's another inconvenience. Will all my direct debits and whatever move across if I move on to some other financial platform and whatever? And therefore, it's almost as if you start a bank account in when you're 20 years old, you will effectively retire with that same bank account. And it's a similar thing also with sort of energy providers and whatever. It's proving very, very difficult to lure people away from the contract they've already got. And in that same way, I think it's very much the same thing with these platforms, that once you're on it, that's what you know. What's this Twitch thing? Oh, I can't be bothered. I've already got Twitter and YouTube and what. I'll just stick with this. Why should I go over to the other platform if I'm going to be looking at the same content? If I'm going to look at the same person anyway, I might as well look at him here while he's on this platform. And I think that's how a lot of people think. And I think, contrary to what they claim, I think people are much more loyal to the platform than they actually are to the content providers.
A lot of the time, yes. I would agree with that.
I really don't think that many people, will have sort of, oh, well, Milo has left Twitter, so I'm now going to leave Twitter and go to Parler or whatever. I really don't think there are that many.
Well, I would say that my audience is the most loyal on YouTube, and clearly they will stick around through thick and thin and be very dismayed if I ever leave.
You forgot to say not only are they most loyal, but they're also the most intelligent and good-looking and generally kind-hearted people.
They don't need to say all that, Britisher. They already know that about themselves. Goodness me. Speaking of the banks, there's the OnlyFans controversy.
The only what?
The OnlyFans controversy.
Oh, the OnlyFans controversy. Yes, I mean, once again, you have got financial institutions thinking that they can decide on our behalf what expression is tolerable and what isn't. And yeah, it makes my blood boil. But what can you do?
It's I find it observing the fact that sex workers suddenly think I like the memes which have come out of it, basically, where they have to get a real job. And it's like your entire life is just making porn on OnlyFans. It's like, you should probably be doing something a little bit more productive with your time. You do something a bit more.
It depends.
Enjoyable.
I mean, some of these people on OnlyFans have been making millions, you know.
Well, they're not banning
basically
nudity. They're banning pornography specifically.
Oh, yes. But what I mean is they are banning it by dictate. They're not. They're not. They haven't come to the conclusion that they wish to do this.
No.
It's that once again the payment processors have come to the conclusion for them that they will do this.
It's exactly the same thing which happened to Tumblr, I think, a little while ago.
Yes,
I think
but it's also what has happened to Patreon. You know, which is much nearer the knuckle. That basically then it was people, particularly right-wing commentators, that were being cut off.
Well, I mean, they did exactly.
Now it's porn, which isn't so popular with the right wing, but it's the same thing, people. It's exactly the same thing.
Just to step this up, shall we say, a notch, you know, like, who are these people? That's what, you know, who is running the payment process? We hear a lot about the people who run Facebook and Google, and angry people who get frustrated. We know a lot about, you know, politicians on both sides, celebrities on both sides, but not a lot gets said about, you know, the banks and the credit card companies and who runs those, and like who is actually dictating these things. You know, who are the people who suddenly made it so that Alex Jones couldn't access any of his funds? What right did they have to do that? Who are these people who are making sweeping changes and saying, look, we simply won't provide ourselves as a payment option if you do this? Where is the moral authority coming from? Who has managed to infiltrate these groups? And suddenly what we've seen over the last 10 years, you know, is it just that there's a particular lobby group that has managed to get in there and we just haven't been talking about them, or we can't see them, or we don't know?
Or is it part of this corporate doctrine whereby one has just basically come to the conclusion, oh, well, anything that could possibly damage our brand, we must distance ourselves from. And, you know, as they sort of say, you know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You know, if everybody thinks that way, sooner or later, just nothing happens.
I mean, payment processors were generally thought of as, you know, exempt, as it were. I mean, they're not even really a brand in the sense, you know. They're very much a B2B, a business-to-business enterprise, and it was all about, you know, just like, oh, you know, you can implement this code on your website or whatever and process your payments through here, and as long as it's not anything illegal, you know, it doesn't really matter then, does it?
Yes. Yes, I mean,
because nobody.
That's how an adult person would look at it. You wouldn't really think. But we live in the day and age in which you know, pressure groups will sort of try and tar and feather a brand.
Because nobody is going to, I don't know, for lack of a better term, Pornhub or something like that, and going, you know, they go to open an account, and then they go, oh, I could pay for this with PayPal. PayPal must be an incredibly evil company to be, you know, supporting the degradation of women online, and etc. etc.
Well, I mean, you say nobody is doing that. Do we know nobody is doing that? That's just it. I mean, we know that it won't be happening in significant numbers, but then we also know that it does not necessarily take significant numbers to kick up a stink.
Yeah. I mean, especially if there's somebody at the company who finds it distasteful as well.
Yes,
you know,
if it basically has got
if the BBC is anything to go by, it could be anything as low as 7 people complained.
Yes, if there is already a receptive audience at the company itself that is then responsive, that basically immediately seizes upon these complaints and goes, see, we must do something about it. Then yeah, but as such, yes, I would assume that everybody would look at payment processors and credit cards in the same way as they look at cash.
Yes.
Nobody blames the Bank of England or the Queen for being on the money regarding what cash is used for.
Nobody would have. OnlyFans has managed to make a stink over this because they say, in their statement, this is because of our banking partners, etc.
Yeah.
But nobody would ever have looked at the banks. Nobody would ever have looked at the banks. OnlyFans would have done it. The blame for whatever happens on OnlyFans would have gone squarely on OnlyFans.
Well, yes, but I think at the heart of this is this sort of societal problem we have today with corporatism, whereby censorship is no longer state mandated, but it is being imposed upon us instead by corporations
who are quite capable of doing it, unfortunately.
who are quite capable of doing it. But then we are then being told, oh, well, it's capitalism. Oh, these companies can do what they want. They obviously have to be free to. And you just go, no, they don't obviously have to be free to do this.
No.
And in the past, this inclination never existed in corporations.
Well, it's usually not.
So what the hell is going on?
It's usually not capitalism. It's usually. It's usually people complain about something a corporation has done, which is sort of violating freedom that was previously allowed, and then they go, well, whatever happened to capitalism? Oh, it's a private company; it can do what it wants. The hypocrisy is staggering everywhere.
Oh yes, I mean you get that a lot from the left, yes, but you also get a lot of confusion from the right in this regard.
No, I don't think it's dichotomized in a left-right distinction. No.
Yes, I don't know what to respond there. Yes,
that's fine. Okay. Jedi Knight Anakin Cringewalker said, when a UN investigates my genetic abominations, I want you to be my Nuremberg trial psych evaluator. Thank you, Jedi Knight Anakin Cringewalker. I will be sure to tell them that I'm shocked and surprised that he's managed to create genetic abominations, given the fact that he has very little knowledge of biology and in fact is running everything off of computer simulations. But there you go. And
given that you try to portray me as someone who sees everyone as being innocent anyway, I would just simply go and argue at the court that he's innocent.
My star witness, a pith helmet resting on a brain in a jar, is going to tell you that this man who goes by the title Jedi Knight is innocent of the crimes for which he is accused.
Yes. I ask to be played by the ghost of Henry Fonda, which of course is referring to another film you have no idea about, which is 12 Angry Men.
I've watched 12 Angry Men. That's why I got the reference.
Ladies and gentlemen, hold the presses. Not so obvious has actually seen a film.
Some time ago.
So did you like 12 Angry Men?
Yeah, it was very good.
There you go. See, so just like Ben-Hur, another very good film.
One might even say gripping. Jedi Knight Anakin Cringewalker also says, I recently looked up Biden's age and realised not only was Hitler still active when he was born, he was still winning the war. Yes, sometimes we forget how old the man really is, but given that they're so keen to keep him looking young and trendy, aren't they, with the sunglasses and the ice cream and everything,
It's strange how people will phrase these things, but I can already see I've got 20 plus notifications on my Twitter again. I must have annoyed some people, I assume.
Oh, I don't. You never annoy anyone.
It might have been a tweet I put out just before I came on. But yes, I'll have to hold until I go and look at that, because I got the feeling that's going to be like a sort of a chicken coop where the fox has got in, and all the chickens are utterly aflutter, and there's nothing else but sort of hay and feathers.
Delay your dopamine rush, Britisher.
Yes.
Do you think Biden is long for this office as opposed to this world? Do you think he's long for this office? I think that they're turning on him.
Put it like this: do you think that the Afghanistan situation has shortened his term in office?
Unclear. It's unclear to me. I wish I could be more concrete on it, but I think on the one hand, you had when Trump was in power, he wanted to get out of Afghanistan. That was one of the big things. He was being heavily criticised by people who have interests, shall we say, especially in sort of big warfare.
Sorry.
Goodness me, Britisher, that was disgusting. I'm wearing headphones that came through.
I'm drinking something, and suddenly some air decided it needed to come up my air tube, and yes, apologies all. This it wasn't that I've got cows in standing next to me. That was me who managed to do that all on his own.
So when we say, has the Afghanistan situation, has the withdrawal from Afghanistan been something that damages Biden? I don't think so. What I think has damaged Biden has been his performance in various interviews, to the point where they trotted out an interview he'd done, I think 2 or 3 years ago, and tried to make a big thing of that being his position on the Afghanistan situation. But of course then people immediately discovered that it was not when he was president and was some time ago. And then secondly, found clips of him saying, the one thing you won't see is a helicopter airlifting people off the US embassy, and then of course that happened. Not to mention the whole, evacuation thing where, that was 4 or 5 days ago, man, to something which had happened the day before. So I think his performance in the arena, they can't trust him to say what they want him to say. They can't trust him to handle an interview. They can't even cut it. It's not even like, an amusing gaffe. He literally has lost his sense of time. That's not a reliable thing.
I think you can imagine I'm a little less scathing on Biden. I see it that is basically this was a ridiculous mess that came about, but he is the guy who is politically responsible, but I don't see him as the one who has basically gone through the step-by-step military planning as to how we will get everybody out of Afghanistan. And I wouldn't even look at it as this is the giant US screw-up. I would say, to my mind, this is the Taliban having just played a blinder. I think they've excelled themselves. Whoever is in charge of their planning deserves an Oscar or something.
I think as well, there's just not that much resistance. I mean, they've been at war for 20 years. Somebody just wants them to impose order. I mean, even if you take into account that the West, I know when we went in there, it was for one reason, and then they decided to nation build. But that entire nation building process as well has been a complete muddle. It's been a lot of stress on the local population.
It's an omni-shambles.
Yeah. They're still bombing people out there. So they're not exactly...
how we were talking... how we were talking about... corporatism and the wokeism and pride and whatever. As I pointed out in the week that was, when it comes to Pride Month, when every single avatar of every single corporation goes rainbow-coloured for June Pride Month because we are so solidaric, it's by now a well-known joke that if you then look at their regional accounts around the world,
Yeah, they don't do it.
all of them go rainbow except those that are actually situated in the Middle East or other Muslim countries.
Yeah.
Those stay fixedly non-rainbow. And yet the US Embassy in Kabul had a nice little tweet about Pride Month and how they stand by LGBTQ plus God only knows what, with a nice picture of a rainbow flag.
Sure.
And you look at it and you just go, yeah, when it comes to the nation building and things being a bit muddled, yes, I think muddled is the word.
Well, so my point is that the Americans, the last time they successfully set up a democracy was 300 years ago, and nearly.
Well, no, that's a bit unfair.
And let me go. And the Taliban still have some leadership experience from when they used to run the country, and then similarly, they're trying to put in place people in a culture they're unfamiliar with, trying to instill some kind of Western idealism that doesn't exist. And it's not even been about self-determination. You don't. And if they're going to set up a democracy, they're not going to be very happy if they get one like Italy, for instance, right?
Well, I would just ask you this one question: is Japan democratic?
I don't know anything about Japan's political system.
Well, I mean, the Americans made them democratic. They basically created the Japanese constitution and so on. So, when it comes to setting up democracies, one of the problems is if you want to set up a democracy, you pretty much have to bomb your opponent back to the Stone Age first. So, the Germans and the Japanese were effectively rendered democracies by being carpet bombed. But that isn't really the nature of warfare these days anymore. And therefore you're kind of going in trying to do a softly approach on cultures that are actually quite resilient against these things. And you try to sort of create democracies, and in the end you only just end up with tribalism. The various tribes vote accordingly. I mean, in Iraq now, the Shias just hold the majority, and they just always vote in the Shias. And you look at that and you just go, oh, we've really achieved a lot here. But yes, when it comes to trying to set up something like that, we long since know that it doesn't work. But, and this is a big but, it never was meant to work. Whether it was Trump or whether it was Biden, what we did was we set up a regime that was a fig leaf that should give us enough time to walk away and say, oh, see, we did this, even though we knew full well that they would collapse. But that's what the Soviets did when they pulled out. The Soviets set up a sort of quasi-government and then walked away saying, oh, well, you see, they are now independent. And yes, how long did that last? So that's what we were really looking for. What happened was that the Taliban, by means of some fighting, I mean, they did do some fighting, by means of where on earth the army was and how dispersed they were. And there was one particular town I heard that they actually took by bluff, that they actually claimed they'd taken it even though they didn't have it. And it was just basically seen as de facto they have it. So when it comes to the Taliban, they just seem to have suddenly been everywhere at the same time in the country. Always remember that, for example, when Afghanistan fell, we used allies that we had on the ground, which was the Northern Alliance, which was the last holdout against the Taliban to the north, which was made up largely of Tajiks and Uzbeks.
Yeah.
And we bombed their way clear for them, and they marched on Kabul. But this time around, some of the first places to fall were the northern provinces. And you look at this and you just went, hang on a moment, that's, that's sort of, completely contrary to what you would expect. So the Taliban, they were up to stuff, and they were really clever in the way they maneuvered. So some of this will have been diplomacy, because it appears to be the way in Afghanistan that once one side starts getting the upper hand, the tribes quickly kind of realize, okay, look, we're up against the thing that can't be resisted, and they sort of fall in line. And my belief is that what happened with the Afghan army was that, yes, they were a unified army of Afghanistan, but they were also private individuals, and all those private individuals still had loyalties to their tribes and their tribal elders and their local warlords and whatever. So once they were told, look, we want you to do this, that's what happened. But that meant that the Taliban had to use the right kind of tactic of carrot and stick. In some places, they did indeed fight. In some places, they just seemed to be maneuvering at unbelievable speed. But at the same time, they seemed to be coming at them from all directions at the same time, which makes it very difficult. How the hell do you fight this? Where the hell are they? So you look at it and you just go, whoever did this was a masterpiece. And I really think that, particularly given that this is entirely sort of guerrilla warfare, it's unbelievable what they pulled off. And it's not a fashionable thing to credit the opponent with being great at what they're doing. The last time we did that more than likely was Rommel, if you know what I mean. But I think when we look at what happened in Afghanistan here, we can just say, oh, this is utter incompetence on our side or whatever. Or we can look at it and just go, my God, what did they just pull off there? And I'm fully aware of the fact that, yes, there was problems with air support on the Afghan side and stuff like that. But nonetheless, they managed to collapse the whole thing in something like 11 days.
Yeah.
In that terrain. And you look at it and you just go, well, I'm sorry, but that was masterful. Because I don't think we managed to take it in 11 days.
No, we really didn't, did we?
So, the thing I compared it to in the week that was, when the invasion of Iraq happened,
yeah,
and you had that advance by that American mechanized column that went all the way up through the desert. So rather than fighting its way through choke point after choke point along the bridges over the two rivers, instead they just went all the way up the desert, pretty much moved just non-stop, got there, then swerved in eastwards and just hit Baghdad. And that is sort of seen as an absolute superlative master plan. And in doing so, they managed to collapse the Iraqi regime in 3 weeks. And yes, that is a superlative plan. But if you acknowledge that was superlative, you also have to acknowledge that taking Afghanistan, even if the Afghan army was having major problems, taking Afghanistan in 11 days is just unreal.
Very impressive, yes. What do you make of the refugees that we're supposedly resettling over here?
Well, I think there's already been one case. You might have tweeted out about this. I don't know. I saw it anyway on Twitter somewhere that somebody was on the no-fly list or something.
They've agreed
so that
20,000.
That begs some questions, that they've already now got somebody who ended up on British soil who was on the no-fly list.
I hadn't heard about that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm yet, I've seen one tweet, so you never know how true that is, if you know what I mean. But that's what I just saw shortly before I came on. When it comes to the Americans doing it, they seem to be ferrying them out to American air bases, and then they're running security checks on them before they're taking them on to the US. And I believe they're using some kind of civil contingency whereby they've actually got the right to sort of use certain airliners, sort of airline planes, which at the moment won't even be that controversial, I guess, because a lot of airline planes won't be being used because air traffic is
so low.
Reduced.
Yeah, so low.
But when it comes to the Brits, I don't know to what extent they're doing that. But there is a big issue. I think, yes, when it comes to people like interpreters and whatever, we have to get folks like that out, because our being there would have been impossible without them. So they are the folks who helped us in practical terms. And those are also folks that will be seen as collaborators by the Taliban, so it's only right that we get them out. However, this list of people one wants to get out seems to be growing by the minute. And now it's also... The last thing I saw was, oh, well, what about LGBTQ+? And you just go, I'm sorry, folks, but, in the end, it is their country. And I just don't see us being the possible recipient of God knows how many tens of thousands of people, particularly given that you have got this dreaded possibility of a certain amount of radicals being able to slip into the country. I think the lower we keep that figure, and I think we will have to take some people, but I think the lower we keep that figure, the lower the chances are that we will import a number of nuts who then want to go and ram people in white vans on bridges.
Indeed. It's also about where we put them, but yes, I agree. Sorry, chaps, it's getting late. Ratface says, "Hey NSO, looking forward to reading your speech in the festival book. Best of luck." Thank you very much, Ratface. Looking forward to giving my speech. I am slated to speak on the Sunday morning, so that will all be hopefully very enjoyable, and I'll do my absolute best to make it worth your while, basically, alongside everyone else who's also speaking. Should be a good time had by all. On that note, it is time to end. Thank you for that. I feel like that was a really, I think, accurate take, especially at the end there, Britisher, with the Afghanistan situation. I think you've done well there. And I will speak to you all next week, same time, Monday evening. Hopefully, Britisher, you'll still be with us and raring to go, as you always are.
Well, I mean, who knows? As I was saying, once you pass about 35, you head into decrepitude. So I can't quite guarantee what state I'm going to be in a week's time.
Well, I shall remain optimistic, at the very least, that you will still be on the way.
As you go on in life, you will begin to appreciate those words of mine more and more.
I don't take this the wrong way, Britisher, but I hope not. that's the way it is. All right, chaps. Thank you very so much to everyone for listening. Thank you to everyone who supported the stream via Super Chat, etc. And we'll see you all next week. Take care, everyone. Have a good time. Bye-bye.
Toodle pip.